The gleaming Patek Philippe on Julian Croft's wrist was a testament to his meticulously crafted life. Expensive, precise, and utterly flawless. Or so he believed. When his beautiful wife Amelia announced her pregnancy, joy was expected. But as her body changed, a cruel obsession with perfection consumed Julian. He saw not new life, but an imperfection, a stain on his pristine world. With callous words and a heart of ice, he cast his pregnant wife out. But 3 weeks later, a single call from Amelia's doctor wouldn't just shatter Julian's illusions. It would ignite a firestorm that would burn his gilded empire to ash. The penthouse apartment on Park Avenue floated above New York City like a modern-day Olympus, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing a panorama of glittering skyscrapers and the distant emerald smudge of Central Park. Inside, the air hummed with the quiet thrum of expensive technology and the subtle scent of imported lilies, always fresh, always perfectly arranged. This was Julian Croft's world, a meticulously curated stage for his equally meticulously curated life. Julian at 38 was the kind of man whose suits were always bespoke, whose handshake was firm to the point of bruising, and whose ambition had carved a swathe through the ruthless world of international finance, leaving him a veritable titan before 40. His company, Croft Holdings, was a name whispered with awe and a touch of fear in boardrooms across the globe. Amelia Dubois had entered this world 5 years prior, a whirlwind romance that had culminated in a wedding splashed across the society pages. She was then an art curator, her beauty as striking as her intellect, possessing a warmth that seemed for a time to thaw even Julian's notoriously cool demeanor. She was his perfect partner, elegant, poised, and a stunning accoutrement at his endless galas and business dinners. Julian often remarked with a proprietary gleam in his eye that they were the city's golden couple. For a while, Amelia had believed it. She'd loved Julian, or at least the man he presented to her in the early days. Charming, attentive, a protector. The opulence, while initially overwhelming, had become a backdrop to what she hoped would be a life filled with love and eventually children. The news of her pregnancy, confirmed by Lena Hansen at the Serafina Clinic for Women, the city's most exclusive and discreet maternity care facility, was for Amelia a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. She'd envisioned Julian's delight, the way his eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, would soften with paternal pride. His initial reaction was indeed one of satisfaction. An heir. It was appropriate, necessary even for the Croft dynasty he was building. He'd presented her with a diamond bracelet, so heavy it felt like a beautiful glittering manacle. "To my perfect wife, carrying my perfect child," the inscription read. The word perfect was beginning to send a small shiver down Amelia's spine. As the first trimester bloomed into the second, Amelia's body began its natural, miraculous transformation. The gentle swell of her belly, the subtle rounding of her hips, these were changes she embraced with a quiet wonder. Julian, however, did not. His observations started as seemingly innocuous comments, slivers of ice in the warm bath of her happiness. "Your dress seems a bit snug today, darling. Perhaps we should have a word with your tailor." Or, "Are you sure the chef is sticking to the nutritionist's plan, Amelia? We wouldn't want any unnecessary expansion." Amelia would force a smile, her heart sinking a little further each time. "It's just the pregnancy, Julian. It's normal." "Normal is a relative term, my dear," he'd reply, his gaze lingering on her changing form with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. But it wasn't admiration. It felt more like scrutiny, like she was a prized racehorse suddenly developing an unforeseen flaw. The real name that often punctuated Julian's demands for perfection was Savile Row. Every suit he owned, every coat, was a testament to the tailors there. He'd once sent back a cashmere sport coat because the lapel stitching was, in his words, a millimeter off from true artistry. This obsession with external flawlessness now turned towards his wife. One evening, as Amelia was dressing for a charity gala, an event Julian insisted they attend despite her increasing fatigue, he walked into their enormous dressing room. She was struggling with the zipper of a custom-made gown, a deep sapphire silk that had only weeks ago fit like a dream. "Having a bit of trouble?" Julian asked, his voice smooth, but with an underlying edge. He wasn't looking at her face, but at her reflection in the mirror, his eyes narrowed on the strain of the fabric across her back. "It's a bit tight," Amelia admitted, her cheeks flushing. "I think I've grown a little more than I anticipated this week." He walked closer, not to help, but to inspect. He circled her slowly like an art critic, examining a statue for imperfections. His Patek Philippe watch, a rare Grand Complications model he particularly favored, glinted under the soft lighting. "Perhaps a little more is an understatement, Amelia. This isn't just baby weight. This is carelessness." The word carelessness struck Amelia like a physical blow. "Julian, how can you say that I'm growing a human being? Our child deserves a mother who maintains a degree of discipline." He retorted, his voice losing its silkiness, replaced by a cold displeasure. "I have an image to uphold. We have an image. Your current state is becoming problematic." Tears pricked Amelia's eyes. "Problematic?" "My pregnancy is problematic for you. Your handling of it." "Yes," he snapped. "Look at yourself. You're letting yourself go. What will people say? What will my business partners think? That Julian Croft can't even manage his own household?" Amelia sank onto the velvet ottoman, the unzipped dress gaping. The beautiful room, filled with designer clothes and priceless jewels, suddenly felt like a luxurious prison. The lilies on the vanity seemed to mock her with their unchanging perfection. "I'm eating healthily, Julian. The doctor says I'm fine, the baby is fine." Dr. Hanson caters to women who can afford to be complacent, Julian sneered. "I expect more. I demand more." He tapped the face of his Patek Philippe. "Time is ticking, Amelia. Get yourself under control, before I lose my patience entirely." He turned and left, leaving Amelia alone with her reflection, a woman who was starting to look less like a cherished wife and more like a failing project. The golden couple's shine was flaking away, revealing something cold and ugly underneath. The cracks were no longer subtle. They were deepening into chasms, and Amelia was terrified of the abyss that lay below. The weight of his expectations, far more than the weight of her growing child, was becoming unbearable. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in Julian Croft's particular brand of cruelty, a slow, deliberate dismantling of Amelia's self-worth, all under the guise of concern and maintaining standards. The Park Avenue penthouse, once a symbol of their shared success, transformed into a battleground where Amelia's changing body was the territory under siege. Julian's comments escalated from snide remarks to outright demands. He hired a new, stricter nutritionist, a stern woman named Miss Albright, who presented Amelia with color-coded charts and portion sizes that seemed better suited to a runway model than a pregnant woman in her second trimester. Meals became an ordeal with Julian, often watching her eat his fork, poised his eyes, scrutinizing every mouthful. "Are you sure that's on Ms. Albright's approved list?" Amelia. Remember, discipline is paramount. Her wardrobe was overhauled. Garments deemed unflattering or too matronly disappeared, replaced by a curated selection of severely tailored maternity wear that Julian insisted would minimize the damage. He spoke of her pregnancy not as a miracle, but as an unfortunate temporary disfigurement that needed to be managed and concealed as much as possible. Amelia found herself retreating, her natural effervescence dimming with each passing day. She made excuses to avoid social engagements. The thought of parading her growing bump under the critical eyes of Julian's associates and Julian himself filling her with anxiety. She knew they weren't just looking at her. They were gauging Julian's reaction, his control. The whispers in their elite circle were subtle but sharp, like tiny shards of glass. One afternoon, Chloe, Amelia's closest friend from her gallery days, came to visit. Chloe, with her bohemian style and refreshingly down-to-earth perspective, took one look at Amelia's haunted eyes and the meticulously arranged, joyless nursery Julian had commissioned, all muted greys and whites devoid of warmth, and her expression grew concerned. "Ames, are you okay?" Chloe asked, her voice gentle, as she took Amelia's hand. "You look fragile." Amelia tried to smile, but it felt like a grimace. "Just tired, Chloe. Pregnancy, you know." "I know pregnancy," Chloe said, her gaze unwavering. "I also know Julian, and I know that look in your eyes. It's the same look you had after your father passed, like you're carrying the weight of the world." Amelia's composure began to crumble. He has very high standards, Chloe, for everything, for me. Standards for what Amelia, for how a pregnant woman should look. Does he think you're a show pony he needs to keep in prime condition? Chloe's voice was laced with an anger Amelia rarely heard from her easygoing friend. "This isn't about standards. It's about control. It's cruel." Amelia pulled her hand away, a flicker of defensiveness, a conditioned response. "He doesn't mean to be cruel. He's just stressed. Business is demanding. And growing his child isn't," Chloe countered. "Ames, this isn't right. What you're describing, it's emotional abuse." The words hung in the air, stark and undeniable. Amelia had skirted around them in her own mind, but hearing Chloe say them aloud was like a splash of icy water. She couldn't refute it. The constant criticism, the monitoring, the implication that her body's natural processes were a personal failing. It was a relentless siege on her spirit. The breaking point arrived during Amelia's 28th week of pregnancy. She was noticeably larger now, the curve of her belly prominent and undeniable. She felt the baby kick a small, fluttering reassurance that she clung to in the face of Julian's increasing hostility. He had been particularly agitated all week, a major deal in Hong Kong, showing signs of unraveling. His temper, always simmering beneath the surface, was now dangerously close to boiling over. He'd summoned her to his study, a cavernous room lined with dark wood and leather-bound books he never read. His desk, a massive slab of polished mahogany, was usually clear, save for his laptop, and a minimalist Vacheron Constantin desk clock, another emblem of his obsession with precision and luxury. Tonight, however, it was littered with papers, and his tie was loosened, a rare sign of disarray. "Sit," he commanded, not looking at her as she lowered herself carefully into one of the stiff leather armchairs opposite him. He finally raised his eyes, and they were cold, devoid of any warmth or affection. "I've been looking at the calendar. The Atherton charity ball is in 3 weeks. It's a crucial event for the New Asia Fund. I need you there, looking your best." Amelia's heart sank. "Julian, I'll be over 7 months pregnant. I'm not sure." "You're not sure you can present a respectable appearance?" he interrupted, his voice rising. "Is that what you're telling me? After all the resources I've poured into managing your condition." "It's not a condition, Julian. It's a pregnancy." Her voice trembled, but a spark of defiance ignited within her. "And I am doing my best, but my body is changing as it's supposed to." "Supposed to?" He laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. "According to whom some textbook for average people. You are not average, Amelia. Or at least you weren't." He stood up, pacing in front of the window, the city lights casting him in a demonic silhouette. "I saw you this morning. You looked swollen, unkempt almost. That dress you were wearing was a disgrace. It made you look enormous." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes, hot and furious. "I am enormous, Julian. I'm carrying your child." "What do you expect?" "I expect the woman I married," he roared, slamming his hand down on the mahogany desk. The Vacheron Constantin clock rattled. "The elegant, poised woman who understood the importance of image of perfection. Not this bloated emotional creature you've become." The cruelty of his words stole her breath. "How dare you?" she whispered, rising unsteadily to her feet. "I dare because it's the truth," he spat, advancing on her. "You've let yourself go completely. You're an embarrassment. I can't have you by my side looking like that. You're ruining everything I've built." "I'm ruining it," Amelia cried, her voice cracking. "By having your baby. Is that how little our child means to you? Is that how little I mean to you?" Julian's face was contorted with rage. "You mean nothing to me if you can't even maintain simple self-control. You're a liability, a flaw in the design." He stopped inches from her, his eyes blazing. "I want you out, Amelia." The words hung in the air, cold and final. "What?" she choked out, disbelieving. "You heard me. Out. I can't stand the sight of you anymore. Pack your things. I'll have my lawyers draw up the papers. Consider this your severance from the Croft lifestyle." He gestured dismissively towards the door. "Go, now. Before I say something No, I won't regret it at all." Amelia stared at him, her mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. This was Julian, her husband, the father of her unborn child. But the man standing before her was a stranger, a monster sculpted from ambition and vanity. "Julian, please," she began, a desperate plea. "Don't beg, Amelia. It's unbecoming." He turned his back on her, gazing out at his kingdom of lights, his profile as hard and unforgiving as the granite of the skyscrapers. "My driver will take you wherever you want to go. Just ensure it's far away from here." Numbly, Amelia turned and walked out of the study, each step an agonizing effort. The beautiful penthouse, her gilded cage, now felt like a tomb. The scent of lilies was cloying, suffocating. As she passed the hall mirror, she caught a glimpse of her reflection. A pregnant woman, her face streaked with tears, her eyes wide with shock and a dawning, terrifying understanding of the abyss Julian had just thrown her into. The unraveling was complete. She was alone. The polished marble lobby of the Park Avenue building, usually a symbol of arrival and prestige, felt like the gateway to an icy exile as Amelia stepped out of the private elevator for the last time. Julian's driver, a stoic man named Peterson, who had witnessed years of the Crofts' public facade, stood by a sleek black Bentley, his expression unreadable. He didn't meet her eyes as he opened the door. Amelia had packed hastily, her hands shaking her mind a maelstrom of disbelief and a pain so profound it felt like a physical wound. She'd taken only a few personal belongings, some clothes that actually fit her burgeoning belly, and a small worn teddy bear, a relic from her own childhood she'd saved for the baby. Julian hadn't emerged from his study. No goodbye, no last look, just the chilling finality of his decree. "Where to Mrs. Croft?" Peterson asked, his voice neutral, as if he were merely chauffeuring her to another one of Julian's endless social obligations. The question hung in the opulent silence of the car. Where could she go? Her parents were gone. Her social circle was Julian's circle, a constellation of people who orbited his wealth and power. The thought of their pity, or worse, their whispered judgments, was unbearable. Then she remembered Chloe. Chloe, who had seen the truth in her eyes. Chloe, who lived in a vibrant, slightly chaotic apartment in Greenwich Village, a world away from Julian's sterile perfection. "Greenwich Village," Amelia managed, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll give you the address." The Bentley glided through the city streets, each familiar landmark, a fresh stab of pain. This was the city where she'd fallen in love, built a life, and dreamed of a family. Now it felt alien and hostile. Chloe lived on a street lined with brownstones and leafy trees, a welcome contrast to the steel and glass canyons of Midtown. When Amelia, tear-streaked and clutching a single suitcase, appeared on her doorstep, Chloe's warm embrace was the first genuine human comfort that Amelia had felt in months. "Oh, Ames," Chloe breathed, ushering her inside. "That bastard! That absolute bastard! Come in. Come in." Chloe's apartment was small but cozy, filled with books, art supplies, and the comforting aroma of brewing coffee. It was a haven of normalcy, of genuine life, so different from the cold, curated emptiness Amelia had left behind. Over endless cups of chamomile tea, the whole sordid story tumbled out. Julian's escalating cruelty, his obsession with her weight, the final brutal dismissal. Chloe listened, her expression shifting from outrage to a fierce, protective anger. "He threw you out pregnant because you're pregnant. The man is a monster, Amelia, a certifiable narcissist. I don't know what to do, Chloe." Amelia wept, the dam of her carefully constructed composure finally breaking. "I have nothing. He controls everything. The accounts, the properties. You have me," Chloe said firmly, squeezing her hand. "And you have that little one." She glanced at Amelia's belly. "We'll figure this out. First things first, you need to see your doctor. Not just for the baby, but for you. The stress he's put you under, it can't be good." Amelia had an appointment scheduled at the Serafina Clinic for Women the following week. The thought of going there alone without Julian's chauffeured car and the aura of being Mrs. Croft filled her with a new kind of dread. But Chloe was right. Her health and the baby's health was paramount now. The next few days were a blur of adjusting to her new reality. Chloe was a rock, helping Amelia navigate the immediate practicalities. She lent her clothes, cooked nourishing meals, and most importantly, listened without judgment. Amelia, for the first time in years, felt like she could breathe, even amidst the wreckage of her life. She contacted a lawyer. Chloe recommended a sharp, compassionate woman named Sarah Chen, who specialized in complex divorce cases. Sarah listened to Amelia's story with growing indignation and promised to fight for her and the child. The day of her appointment at the Serafina Clinic arrived. Chloe insisted on accompanying her. As they stepped into the clinic's hushed, elegant reception area, Amelia couldn't help but feel a pang of her old life. The women here were impeccably dressed, exuding an air of quiet wealth. She felt conspicuous in Chloe's borrowed, slightly too bohemian dress. Dr. Evelyn Hayes, a woman in her late 50s with kind eyes and a calm, reassuring demeanor, had been Amelia's obstetrician since the beginning of her pregnancy. She had always been professional, though Amelia had sometimes sensed a flicker of concern behind her polite smiles during appointments when Julian was present with his controlling questions and dismissive attitude towards Amelia's own queries. Today, Dr. Hayes greeted Amelia with a warm smile that seemed more genuine than usual. "Amelia, Chloe, come in." Once in the examination room, Amelia explained, haltingly at first, then with growing clarity, what had happened. That Julian had thrown her out, that she was now staying with a friend, that the stress had been immense. Dr. Hayes listened patiently, her expression becoming increasingly grave. "Amelia, I am so incredibly sorry you've had to endure this," she said, her voice filled with sincere empathy. "No woman should be treated this way, especially during pregnancy. The kind of stress you've described can have serious implications." She proceeded with the routine checkup: blood pressure, weight, listening to the baby's heartbeat. Amelia's blood pressure was elevated, a fact Dr. Hayes noted with a frown. "Your pressure is higher than I'd like, Amelia, and while your weight gain is perfectly normal for this stage, especially with how you're carrying, I want to run some additional tests today. Given the extreme duress you've been under, we need to be thorough." An ultrasound was performed. Watching the grainy black-and-white image of her baby moving on the screen, its tiny heart flickering rapidly, brought fresh tears to Amelia's eyes. This was real. This was her child, innocent and entirely dependent on her. A fierce wave of protectiveness washed over her, solidifying her resolve. She would not let Julian's cruelty define her or her child's future. "The baby's growth seems on track," Dr. Hayes said, her focus on the screen. "Heartbeat is strong." Then she paused, maneuvering the transducer. That's interesting." Amelia's breath caught. What is it?" Dr. Hayes was silent for a moment longer, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Amelia," she said, turning to her with a gentle but serious look. "There's something I didn't pick up on previous scans, or perhaps it wasn't as clear. It seems you've been carrying a bit more than we initially thought." Chloe leaned forward, her hand instinctively going to Amelia's shoulder. "What do you mean?" Amelia asked, her heart pounding. Dr. Hayes smiled a small, tentative smile. "Amelia, it appears you're not just having one baby. You're having two. You're pregnant with twins." Amelia stared at her, speechless. Twins. The excessive weight gain Julian had berated her for the reason he had called her bloated and undisciplined. She was carrying two babies. A hysterical laugh, tinged with tears, bubbled up from her. Twins. It wasn't a flaw, it was a double blessing. But Dr. Hayes's expression quickly sobered again. "This is wonderful news, of course, Amelia, but a twin pregnancy inherently carries more risks, and given your elevated blood pressure and the recent stress, we need to be extra vigilant. I want you on modified bed rest for now, and we'll need to monitor you very closely. There are some further tests I need to send off, just to be comprehensive." The news of twins was a shock, a joyful, terrifying, vindicating shock. But as Amelia left the clinic with Chloe, a new anxiety settled in. She was now responsible for 2 lives, and she was doing it alone with an uncertain future and an ex-husband who had shown himself capable of unimaginable cruelty. The glimmer of hope, the double miracle growing inside her, was tinged with the shadow of the challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, Amelia also felt a surge of strength. She wasn't just Julian Croft's discarded wife. She was Amelia Dubois, and she was about to become a mother of two. The 3 weeks that followed the revelation of the twin pregnancy were a strange mix of anxiety, burgeoning hope, and a surprising sense of peace for Amelia. Confined mostly to Chloe's comfortable couch under doctor's orders for modified bed rest, she had time to think, to grieve, and to begin planning for a future she hadn't envisioned. Chloe was her guardian angel, ferrying her tea and healthy snacks, reading aloud from novels, and handling communication with Sarah Chen, the lawyer. Sarah was making progress. She had formally notified Julian's legal team of Amelia's situation and her intent to file for divorce, seeking full custody and substantial child support, especially now given the twin pregnancy and Amelia's high-risk status, requiring specialized care. Julian's lawyers had responded with characteristic arrogance, initially offering a paltry, insulting settlement, clearly underestimating Amelia's resolve and the changing circumstances. Amelia's focus, however, was on the upcoming follow-up appointment with Dr. Hayes. The doctor had ordered a more detailed fetal assessment and some genetic screening standard for multiple pregnancies, but carrying an extra weight of worry for Amelia, given the stress she'd endured. The day of the appointment arrived grey and drizzly, mirroring Amelia's apprehension. Chloe, ever supportive, drove her carefully to the Serafina clinic. Dr. Hayes greeted them with her usual calm, but Amelia detected an underlying seriousness in her demeanor that set her nerves on edge. "Amelia, Chloe, thank you for coming in. I have the results from the tests we ran." They sat in Dr. Hayes's comfortable office, the framed medical degrees on the wall suddenly seeming very imposing. "The good news first." Dr. Hayes began, offering a small, reassuring smile. "Both babies are growing steadily. Twin A, who is slightly larger, and Twin B. Their heart rates are strong and their basic anatomy scans are looking good." Amelia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Oh, thank God." However, Dr. Hayes continued, her expression becoming more somber. "The detailed screening has revealed a concern with Twin B. It appears baby B has a congenital heart defect. It's a condition called tetralogy of Fallot. It's serious, Amelia, and will require surgical intervention, likely multiple surgeries after birth, and potentially ongoing specialized cardiac care throughout childhood." The room seemed to tilt. Amelia gripped Chloe's hand, her knuckles white. A heart defect. One of her precious babies. "Oh my God," she whispered. Is it because of the stress? Did I do this?" "Absolutely not, Amelia," Dr. Hayes said firmly, her voice full of compassion. "These conditions are congenital, meaning they form early in fetal development. It is nothing you did or didn't do. These things just happen, sometimes." She paused, then continued. "There is something else. The genetic screening also flagged a rare recessive genetic marker that both you and the biological father would need to carry for it to manifest as a specific syndrome in one of the children, which can sometimes be associated with such heart conditions. It's not definitive for the syndrome itself without further testing on the baby after birth and on you and Julian, but the marker for the potential is there. And this particular marker is also linked to an adult-onset neurological condition in carriers." Amelia's mind struggled to process the information. A heart defect, surgeries, a rare genetic marker. Adult-onset neurological condition. 4. For carriers like me or Julian. "Potentially, yes," Dr. Hayes confirmed gently. "It's something that carriers should be aware of and screened for as they get older. The more pressing concern right now, of course, is baby B's heart and ensuring the best possible outcome. The neonatal cardiology team here at Serafina is excellent. We're talking about significant medical expenses, specialized care. Chloe, ever practical even in crisis, asked, "What are the chances of a full recovery for baby B?" With the right interventions, many children with tetralogy of Fallot go on to lead full and healthy lives, Dr. Hayes explained. But it will be a challenging road, particularly in the first few years, and the costs, as I mentioned, will be substantial. Amelia felt a wave of nausea. Julian, with his obsession with perfection, with his dismissal of her condition. How would he react to news of an imperfect child, a child requiring vast sums of money for medical care? The irony was a bitter pill. It was Sarah Chen, Amelia's lawyer, who orchestrated how the news would reach Julian. After a detailed consultation with Amelia and Dr. Hayes, with Amelia's consent, Sarah drafted a formal letter to Julian's legal team. It outlined the diagnosis of twins baby B's serious heart condition, requiring extensive and costly medical intervention, and the potential genetic implications for Julian himself, subtly hinting at the adult-onset neurological condition Dr. Hayes had mentioned. The letter included estimated costs for baby B's care figures that ran into the high 6, possibly 7 figures for the initial years alone. It also reiterated Amelia's demand for full custody and a revised, significantly larger settlement to ensure the lifelong well-being of their children, particularly the specialized needs of twin B. The letter landed on Julian Croft's massive mahogany desk like a ticking time bomb. Julian, already incensed by Amelia's defiance and the escalating demands from her lawyer, had been in a foul mood for weeks. The Hong Kong deal was still precarious, and his carefully controlled world felt like it was fraying at the edges. He'd dismissed Amelia's initial legal threats as hysterics. He'd provide a reasonable amount, enough to silence her, and then erase her and her inconvenient pregnancy from his life. He read Sarah Chen's letter, his brow furrowing. "Twins," he scoffed. Just Amelia's luck to double down on her leverage. Then he reached the part about baby B's congenital heart defect. Tetralogy of Fallot, surgical intervention, ongoing specialized care. The words swam before his eyes. Imperfect, a defective child, his child. The estimated costs were staggering. But it wasn't just the money. It was the flaw, the imperfection. His heir, or one of them, was damaged. Then he read the section about the rare recessive genetic marker, the potential adult-onset neurological condition for carriers. For him. Julian felt a cold dread seep into his bones, a sensation entirely alien to him. Julian Croft, the epitome of strength and perfection, a carrier of a flawed gene, a potential ticking time bomb within his own perfect physique. He thought of his Patek Philippe, its intricate movements a marvel of precision. His own body, he now realized, could harbor a hidden catastrophic imperfection. His initial reaction was denial, then rage. He hurled the letter across the room. "Lies! She's making it up to extort me!" he roared to the empty study. He imagined Amelia smugly plotting this, using a sick child to ruin him. He picked up the phone and dialed his lead attorney, barking orders. "Get to the bottom of this. I want independent verification. This is a sham." But deep down, a sliver of terror had pierced his armor. He remembered his own father, a man Julian had always tried to surpass, who had suffered from a mysterious, debilitating illness in his later years, something the family never spoke about, attributing it to stress. Could it be connected? The next few days were a blur of frantic activity for Julian's legal and medical team. They contacted the Serafina Clinic, demanding access to records which were only released with Amelia's tightly controlled consent, further infuriating Julian. They consulted their own high-priced medical experts. The news that came back was unequivocal. Dr. Hayes's diagnosis was accurate. Baby B did indeed have tetralogy of Fallot. The genetic marker was real. And yes, it carried implications for Julian himself, necessitating he undergo genetic testing. The destruction of Julian Croft began not with a bang, but with the quiet, irrefutable confirmation of medical science. His carefully constructed facade of perfection, already cracked by Amelia's departure, now showed signs of catastrophic structural failure. His image, the flawless tycoon, the man in control, was threatened. News like this, if it got out, would be devastating. His business partners, his rivals, the society vultures, they would pick him apart. Marcus Thorne, his long-time competitor, would have a field day. But it was more than public image. It was the personal horror. His child was imperfect. He himself might be imperfect, a carrier of a flaw. The irony was a cruel, relentless tormentor. His disgust for Amelia's weight gain, her natural maternal transformation, now seemed like a grotesque joke in the face of this. He had cast out his wife, the mother of his children, for the crime of being human, while he himself carried the seeds of genetic fallibility. He recalled Amelia's face tear-streaked and pleading as he'd ordered her out. He remembered his cold dismissal, his utter lack of compassion. The weight of his cruelty for the first time began to settle upon him not as a distant intellectual concept, but as a crushing personal burden. The news from the doctor, intended to secure Amelia and her children's future, had done more than that. It had planted a seed of terror in Julian's soul, and the tendrils of that fear were rapidly taking root, threatening to pull down everything he had built, starting with the man himself. His world wasn't just crumbling. It was being systematically, irrevocably destroyed from the inside out. The confirmation of Baby B's condition and the implications of the genetic marker sent Julian Croft into a spiral. His legendary composure evaporated, replaced by a volatile mixture of rage, fear, and a dawning, horrifying self-awareness. He retreated into his Park Avenue fortress, the silence of the opulent rooms now amplifying his inner turmoil. The Patek Philippe on his wrist felt heavy, its precise ticking a mocking reminder of the unpredictable, messy reality that had invaded his life. His first instinct, born of years of bulldozing obstacles, was to control the narrative, to fix the unfixable. He ordered his lawyers to spare no expense, to find the best doctors in the world, to somehow reverse the diagnosis, to make Baby B perfect. He demanded they prepare a counteroffer to Amelia, one that would ensure her silence by her cooperation and allow him to manage the situation with his customary ruthless efficiency. He even entertained the ludicrous notion of somehow proving the child wasn't his, a desperate last-ditch attempt to sever himself from this unwelcome imperfection. But reality for once was not amenable to Julian's will. The medical facts were immutable. His attempts to intimidate or buy off the Serafina Clinic or Dr. Hayes met with a wall of ethical professionalism. Amelia, guided by Sarah Chen, refused to be silenced or controlled. She wasn't interested in his money for her silence. She was interested in securing her children's future and holding Julian accountable. The news, as such news inevitably does in the rarefied circles Julian inhabited, began to leak. Whispers turned into rumors, then into hushed conversations at exclusive clubs and charity dinners. "Did you hear about Julian Croft? His wife, something about the baby." Marcus Thorne. Julian's slick, perpetually smirking rival was rumored to be discreetly fanning the flames, enjoying Julian's evident distress. The board members of Croft Holdings grew uneasy. Julian's erratic behavior, his unexplained absences from key meetings, his visible agitation. It was all noticed. The precarious Hong Kong deal, already on shaky ground, began to collapse as Julian's focus shattered. His reputation for icy control and infallible judgment, the very bedrock of his financial empire, was eroding. Then came the results of Julian's own genetic test. It confirmed what Dr. Hayes's report had suggested: he was indeed a carrier of the rare genetic marker. And worse, further investigation into his family medical history, which he now pursued with a desperate urgency, unearthed a pattern. His father's mysterious illness was almost certainly the adult-onset neurological condition associated with the marker. The same condition that now loomed in Julian's own future like a spectre. Julian Croft, was not just a carrier of imperfection. He was its potential victim. The irony was complete, a cosmic joke played at his expense. His attempts to reconcile with Amelia were clumsy and self-serving. He didn't approach her with remorse, but with demands couched in panicked offers of financial support. Always with strings attached, always about controlling the optics. He sent emissaries, then flowers, then increasingly desperate, rambling emails. Amelia, now in her third trimester, and under strict medical supervision, read his communications with a sort of weary detachment. The man who had so cruelly dismissed her and their unborn child was now begging for a semblance of connection, not out of love, but out of fear for his own legacy, his own health, his own collapsing world. "He doesn't get it, does he?" Amelia said to Chloe one afternoon, after reading a particularly self-pitying email from Julian. "He still thinks this is about money, about image. He's incapable of understanding anything else," Chloe replied, gently massaging Amelia's swollen ankles. "His entire world is built on those foundations, and now they're crumbling." The legal battle intensified. Sarah Chen, armed with the irrefutable medical evidence and Julian's increasingly desperate behavior, pressed hard. She painted a picture of Julian not as a concerned father, but as a man trying to mitigate damage to his reputation and financial standing. She argued for, and was granted, a court order compelling Julian to place a significant sum into a trust for the twins' medical care and upbringing, a sum that made even Julian, with his vast wealth, flinch. His attempts to contest Amelia's sole custody were systematically dismantled, his past cruelty and neglect now his undoing. The public fallout was swift and brutal. A disgruntled former employee of Croft Holdings, sensing an opportunity, leaked details of Julian's treatment of Amelia and the subsequent revelations about the baby's health to a prominent financial journalist. The story, the cracks in the Croft empire, perfection paternity, and a pending payout, went viral. It detailed his callousness towards his pregnant wife, his obsession with image, and the ironic twist of his own genetic flaw. The narrative was irresistible, the mighty Julian Croft undone by his own hubris and hypocrisy. His business world turned on him. Partners distanced themselves. Investors pulled out. The carefully constructed edifice of Croft Holdings began to teeter. Marcus Thorne launched a hostile takeover bid, timing it perfectly to exploit Julian's vulnerability. The board, seeing the writing on the wall and Julian's inability to effectively lead, forced him to step down as CEO. Julian Croft, the man who had everything, found himself increasingly isolated. His friends melted away. His Park Avenue penthouse felt less like a palace and more like a luxurious prison, its silent rooms echoing with his failures. He would catch his reflection in the polished surfaces and see not the master of the universe, but a haunted, haggard man, his bespoke suits suddenly looking ill-fitting on his visibly stressed frame. The Patek Philippe still ticked on his wrist, but its precision now seemed to mock the chaos of his life. His destruction wasn't just financial or social, it was profoundly personal. He had prided himself on his perfection, his control. Now he was faced with the undeniable imperfection of his child and the terrifying potential for his own physical and mental decline. The cruelty he had inflicted on Amelia, dismissing her natural maternal changes as a disgusting flaw, now rebounded on him with devastating force. He had sown contempt and reaped a harvest of ruin. He would sometimes drive by Chloe's unassuming Greenwich village, building a pathetic, shadowy figure in his now less frequently chauffeured car. He never got out. What could he say? He had no words of genuine remorse, only a gaping emptiness where his pride used to be. He had thrown away the only woman who had ever truly loved him, and with her, his only chance at a real family, a real legacy beyond stock prices and steel towers. The comeuppance was not a single dramatic event, but a slow, agonizing unraveling. It was the daily erosion of his power, the contempt in the eyes of his former colleagues, the pitying glances of strangers, and the gnawing fear of his own genetic inheritance. It was the realization that in his relentless pursuit of a flawless life, he had destroyed any chance of a happy one. He was left with his vast, sterile apartment, his diminished fortune, and the bitter ashes of his shattered arrogance. The doctor's news had indeed destroyed him, not through malice, but through the simple, unyielding power of truth. While Julian's world imploded, Amelia's was in a strange way expanding. The fear and uncertainty hadn't vanished, but they were now interwoven with a steely determination and the profound burgeoning love for the two tiny lives she carried. Her days were no longer dictated by Julian's whims or the oppressive atmosphere of the penthouse, but by the rhythms of her pregnancy doctor's appointments and the quiet, unwavering support of Chloe. The Serafina Clinic became a second home. Dr. Hayes and her team were a beacon of calm expertise, guiding Amelia through the complexities of a high-risk twin pregnancy. The neonatal cardiologists explained baby B's upcoming surgeries with compassion and confidence, assuring Amelia that while the journey would be challenging, there was every reason for optimism. Amelia focused on their words, on the strength of her babies, and on her own resilience. In the final weeks of her pregnancy, Amelia moved into a modest but bright two-bedroom apartment that Sarah Chen had helped secure using funds from the initial emergency support order. Chloe, of course, helped her decorate, filling it with warmth, soft colors, and the promise of new beginnings. It was a world away from the cold grandeur of Park Avenue, and Amelia loved it. It was hers. The twins, a boy and a girl, arrived a few weeks early, as is common with multiple births. Amelia named them Liam Twin, a robust and calm, and Sophie Twin B Tiny, but with a surprisingly strong cry. Sophie was indeed born with tetralogy of Fallot, and was whisked away to the neonatal intensive care unit, almost immediately a tiny warrior preparing for her first battle. Amelia, recovering from a cesarean section, found a strength she didn't know she possessed. She divided her time between Liam's bassinet and Sophie's incubator, whispering words of love and encouragement to both. Chloe was a constant presence, as was Aunt Mariah, a kind, sensible woman, Amelia's late mother's sister, who had flown in from Vermont upon hearing the news, her calm practicality a soothing balm. Sophie's first open-heart surgery, performed when she was just 10 days old, was the longest, most terrifying day of Amelia's life. She sat in the waiting room, Liam cradled in Aunt Mariah's arms, Chloe pacing beside her, the minutes stretching into an eternity. When the surgeon finally emerged, his face tired but hopeful, and announced that the surgery had gone well. Amelia crumpled in relief, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. Julian was notably absent from this chapter. He had been served with the final divorce papers and the custody agreement, which granted Amelia full legal and physical custody. He was permitted supervised visitation under strict conditions if and when Amelia deemed it appropriate and not detrimental to the children's well-being. He had not contested. The fight, it seemed, had gone out of him. His lawyers had quietly agreed to the substantial child support and medical trust fund. His only communication had been a stilted formal note delivered by his attorney, acknowledging the birth and stating that funds had been transferred. There was no personal touch, no flicker of paternal feeling, only the cold mechanics of legal obligation. Sophie's recovery was slow but steady. There would be more surgeries, more challenges, but she was a fighter. Liam, meanwhile, thrived, a healthy, happy baby. Amelia, watching her children, felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. This was her wealth now. Not the cold gleam of diamonds or the silent approval of high society, but the warmth of Liam's small hand gripping her finger, the resilient beat of Sophie's mending heart, the unconditional love of her small, supportive circle. She started a blog, Sophie's Heart, chronicling their journey, offering support and information to other parents of children with congenital heart defects. It gained a quiet following, her honesty and resilience resonating with many. She even began to sketch again, her old passion for art rekindled, finding an outlet for the complex emotions that filled her days. Julian Croft, meanwhile, faded into a kind of self-imposed exile. His business empire was a shadow of its former self, carved up and sold off in pieces. Marcus Thorne now sat in Julian's old office, the Patek Philippe on his wrist, a newer, flashier model. Julian lived quietly, almost reclusively, in a smaller though still luxurious apartment on the Upper West Side. He was rarely seen. Rumors occasionally surfaced about his health, his increasing paranoia about the ticking genetic clock within him. He was a man haunted by the ghosts of his own arrogance and the family he had so casually discarded. He did once attempt a supervised visit. Liam and Sophie were nearly a year old. Amelia agreed more for her children's potential future curiosity than for Julian's sake. He arrived looking older, grayer, his expensive suit hanging loosely on his diminished frame. He was awkward and visibly uncomfortable around the babies, who, sensing his unease, cried whenever he came near. He fumbled with a toy, his hands trembling slightly. He couldn't meet Amelia's gaze for long. The visit was short and deeply uncomfortable for everyone. He never requested another. Amelia, watching him leave that day, felt not triumph nor even anger, but a profound pity. He had everything the world valued: wealth, power, prestige. But in the end, he had nothing of true worth. He had mistaken the gilded cage for a kingdom, and in his desperate attempt to keep it pristine, had shattered the only real treasures it might have held. Years passed. Liam grew into a boisterous, kind-hearted boy. Sophie, after 2 more successful surgeries, was a spirited, intelligent girl with a mischievous smile and a faint scar down her chest that Amelia called her bravery badge. She required ongoing monitoring, but her prognosis was excellent. Amelia, with the help of the trust fund and her own burgeoning career as a writer and patient advocate, provided them with a life full of love, laughter, and genuine security. She eventually found love again with a kind pediatrician she met through Sophie's specialist, a man who cherished her and her children for exactly who they were. Julian Croft became a footnote in their lives, a cautionary tale. The doctor's news, delivered 3 weeks after he'd callously thrown Amelia out, hadn't just destroyed his world. It had, in a way, liberated Amelia to build a new one. A better one, founded not on the illusion of perfection, but on the enduring strength of love, resilience, and the messy, beautiful reality of life. Her real wealth was in the laughter of her children, the warmth of her home, and the peace in her own heart. Riches. Julian Croft, in his pursuit of a flawless facade, could never comprehend and would never possess. Julian Croft's obsession with a flawless image led him to cast away his pregnant wife Amelia for gaining weight. A cruel act that set in motion his own spectacular downfall. The doctor's news weeks later, revealing not only twins, but a serious health condition in one child, and a genetic bombshell for Julian himself, shattered his perfect world. It's a stark reminder that true wealth isn't measured in gold or prestige, but in compassion, love, and the messy, imperfect beauty of human connection. Amelia's journey from a gilded cage to a life of genuine fulfillment with her children shows us the incredible strength of the human spirit. The sleek black Amex card, the one he'd always called their dream builder, slid silently through the machine. But the dream it was funding wasn't theirs. As I stood in the cavernous empty shell of our home, the stark white of an eviction notice, a ghostly stain on the wall. A different reality hit me with the force of a physical blow. Just across town, in a sun-drenched loft, with views of the city skyline, the scent of expensive perfume, not packing tape, filled the air. He was paying her rent with our future, while I and our unborn child were being thrown onto the street. Eleanor, or Ellie as everyone called her, believed she was living a modern-day fairy tale. At 28, she was married to the man of her dreams, Liam, a charismatic and ambitious financial analyst who seemed to conjure success out of thin air. They lived in a stunning pre-war brownstone in Brooklyn's prestigious Park Slope, a neighborhood where old-world charm met new-world money. Their life was a carefully curated collection of beautiful moments, weekend trips to the Hamptons reservations, at impossible-to-get restaurants like the world-renowned Per Se, and a social calendar that was the envy of their peers. Ellie, a talented illustrator, whose whimsical designs graced the pages of children's books, had willingly put her career on the back burner. Liam, with his easy smile and confident demeanor, had convinced her that his work was more than enough to support them, especially with a baby on the way. He was building an empire for them. He'd said, his eyes sparkling with a sincerity she never thought to question. And so she'd channeled her creative energies into creating the perfect home, a sanctuary of love and warmth for their growing family. The nursery was a testament to her devotion. Hand-painted murals of gentle smiling giraffes and hot air balloons drifted across the pale yellow walls. A vintage rocking chair, a treasured heirloom from her grandmother, sat in the corner, a hand-knitted blanket draped expectantly over its arm. Every detail was infused with love, a tangible manifestation of her hopes and dreams for the child nestled safely beneath her heart. She was 7 months pregnant, and the weight of her belly was a constant comforting reminder of the new life she was about to bring into the world. She'd never been happier, or so she thought. The first crack in her gilded cage appeared subtly, almost imperceptibly. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of crisp, sun-drenched autumn day that made New York City feel like the center of the universe. Ellie was watering her collection of orchids, their vibrant petals a splash of exotic beauty against the exposed brick of their living room when the mail arrived. Tucked between a glossy catalogue from a high-end baby boutique and a handwritten note from her mother was a plain white envelope. There was no return address, just a stark, impersonal window revealing their names and address. She slit it open with a casual flick of her wrist, her mind already drifting to the organic cotton onesies she'd been eyeing online. But the words that leaped out at her from the page made the breath catch in her throat. "Final notice," it screamed in bold red letters. "Eviction proceedings to be initiated." It had to be a mistake, a cruel bureaucratic error. They were the golden couple, the ones who had it all. People like them didn't get evicted. Liam handled all the finances, a domain he'd gently but firmly insisted was his responsibility. He was meticulous, organized, and brilliant with numbers. A man who could dissect the complexities of the stock market in his sleep wouldn't simply forget to pay the rent on their multi-million-dollar home. She tried to call him, her fingers trembling as she dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail. "Liam, darling, it's me." She began, her voice a little higher, a little more strained than usual. "I just received the strangest letter. It says we're being evicted. It's obviously a mistake, but it's a bit unsettling. Call me back when you get this." She spent the rest of the day in a fog of anxiety, her earlier contentment shattered. She tried to distract herself by organizing the baby's clothes. The tiny garments a stark contrast to the ugliness of the letter that now lay on the kitchen counter, a venomous snake in her domestic paradise. But every time she folded a miniature sock or a soft flannel swaddle, the word evicted echoed in her mind. Liam didn't call back. As afternoon bled into evening and the golden hour light that usually filled their apartment with a magical glow seemed only to highlight the dust motes dancing in the air, a new and unfamiliar feeling began to creep into Ellie's heart. Doubt. It was a cold, slithering thing, coiling itself around the edges of her carefully constructed world. She had always trusted Liam implicitly. His confidence was her anchor, his ambition, her security. But now, in the unnerving silence of their beautiful, possibly soon-to-be former home, she began to see things in a different light. The late nights at the office he'd claimed were spent closing a big deal. The hushed phone calls he'd take in the other room, his voice a low, urgent murmur. The way he'd become increasingly protective of his phone and laptop, angling them away from her whenever she came near. She had dismissed it all as the stress of his high-pressure job. She'd made excuses for him for them, because the alternative was simply unthinkable. Just as she was about to try his number again, her own phone buzzed. It was a text from him. "Sorry, honey. Swamped in meetings. Everything okay?" The casualness of his message, the complete lack of concern, was like a douse of cold water. "Everything okay?" She stared at the words, a bitter laugh bubbling up in her throat. She typed back, her thumbs flying across the screen. "Everything is not okay. We got an eviction notice. I've been trying to call you all day. What is going on?" The three little dots that indicated he was typing appeared and disappeared several times before his reply finally came through. "It's a mix-up with the landlord. A clerical error. Don't worry your pretty little head about it. I'll sort it out tomorrow. I'll be late tonight. Don't wait up. Don't worry your pretty little head about it." The condescending words, once a term of endearment, now felt like a slap in the face. He was dismissing her, treating her like a child who couldn't possibly comprehend the complexities of the real world, the world he had so carefully constructed for her. That night, for the first time in her marriage, Ellie didn't sleep in their plush, king-sized bed. Instead, she sat in the vintage rocking chair in the nursery, the eviction notice clutched in her hand, the hand-painted giraffes on the wall seeming to mock her with their gentle, unblinking eyes. The gilded cage had become a prison, and she was starting to realize that the man she had married might not be her Prince Charming, but her jailer. And as the city that never sleeps hummed its relentless lullaby outside her window, a single terrifying question began to form in her mind. If the money wasn't going to their rent, where was it going? The answer, she suspected, lay somewhere in the digital labyrinth of Liam's life, a world he had so carefully shielded from her view. And as the first rays of dawn broke over the Brooklyn skyline, a new and steely resolve hardened in Ellie's heart. She would find the truth no matter how ugly it was. Her fairy tale was over. It was time to wake up. The next morning, the city awoke to a world washed clean by an overnight shower. But for Ellie, everything remained shrouded in a murky fog of suspicion. Liam had slipped into bed in the early hours, smelling faintly of a perfume she didn't recognize, and the stale scent of a lie. He'd mumbled something about a celebratory dinner with clients, a deal finally sealed. He didn't mention the eviction notice, and when Ellie, feigning sleep, had remained silent, he seemed to take it as a sign that his placating text had worked. He was already in the shower when she slipped out of bed, her mind whirring with a desperate plan. His laptop. It was his digital fortress, the one place he guarded more fiercely than anything else. She knew his password, or at least she thought she did. It was supposed to be the date of their anniversary, a romantic detail that now seemed sickeningly ironic. She tiptoed into his home office, a space that was usually off-limits to her, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The sleek silver laptop sat on the polished mahogany desk, a silent sentinel guarding its secrets. She lifted the lid, her breath held tight in her chest. The screen lit up, displaying a login prompt. She typed in their anniversary date. Incorrect password. Her heart sank. He had changed it. The realization was another small, sharp betrayal. When had he changed it? And why? Frantically, she tried other combinations. His birthday. Her birthday, the name of his childhood pet. Nothing worked. Defeated, she was about to close the laptop when her eyes fell on a small, leather-bound notebook tucked away on a bookshelf. It was his old journal, one he'd kept during their first year together. She'd always teased him about it, his anachronistic attachment to pen and paper in a digital age. She flipped through the pages, a wave of nostalgia washing over her as she saw her own name intertwined with his in the margins. And then on the last page, she found it. A series of seemingly random letters and numbers, scrawled in his familiar looping handwriting. Underneath it in parentheses were 2 words, new key. With trembling fingers, she typed the new password into the laptop. It worked. The screen unlocked, revealing his desktop a clean, organized interface that belied the chaos bubbling beneath the surface. For a moment, she felt a pang of guilt. This was a gross violation of his privacy. But the eviction notice still lying on her nightstand was a stark reminder of what was at stake. Her home. Her child's future. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she knew she would recognize it when she saw it. She started with his emails, scanning through subject lines, her eyes darting over endless chains of work-related correspondence, and then she saw it. Then she saw a folder labeled personal. Her heart leaped into her throat. She clicked it open. The contents were a mundane collection of online shopping receipts, travel confirmations, and newsletters. She was about to give up when a subfolder innocuously titled Apartment caught her eye. She opened it, and the world tilted on its axis. Inside was a series of emails from a real estate agent detailing the lease agreement for a luxury loft apartment in Soho. The monthly rent was a staggering $10,000. The tenant's name was listed as Isabella Rossi, and the payments she saw, with a growing sense of nausea, were being made from a bank account she had never heard of, an account that was clearly undeniably Liam's. She clicked on a link in one of the emails, a virtual tour of the apartment. The camera panned across a sun-drenched living room with floor-to-ceiling windows, a sleek modern kitchen with stainless steel appliances, and a bedroom with a king-sized bed and a balcony overlooking the city. It was the kind of apartment you saw in magazines, a fantasy home for a fantasy life. A life Liam was apparently living with someone else. Isabella Rossi. The name was unfamiliar, and yet it felt like a physical blow. Who was she, and why was Liam paying for her extravagant lifestyle while their own home was being foreclosed? The questions swirled in Ellie's mind, a vortex of confusion and betrayal. She dug deeper, her search now, more focused, more frantic. She opened his bank statements, the ones from the secret account. The transactions told a story that was both sordid and heartbreakingly clear. There were charges from high-end restaurants she'd never been to, receipts from designer boutiques she could only dream of shopping at, and a recurring monthly payment to a high-end floral delivery service. It was a paper trail of an affair, a meticulously documented chronicle of his deception. And then she saw the charge that made her blood run cold. A payment of $5,000 to a name she recognized, Dr. Catherine Allister, one of New York's top obstetricians, an obstetrician that was not her own. The date of the payment was just 2 weeks ago. The implication was so monstrous, so utterly devastating that she couldn't process it at first. She stared at the screen, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were seeing. But the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, forming a picture of a betrayal so profound it threatened to shatter her completely. Isabella Rossi was not just his mistress. She was pregnant. The sound of the shower turning off jolted her back to the present. She quickly closed the laptop, her hands shaking so badly she could barely function. She had to get out of there. Had to get away from him, from the life that was now a lie. She grabbed her purse and her keys. Her mind, a blank slate of shock and grief. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay in that house, in that life, for one more second. As she opened the front door, Liam emerged from the bedroom, a towel wrapped around his waist, a cheerful smile on his face. "Morning, sleepyhead," he said, his voice a jovial melody that grated on her raw nerves. "I was just about to make you some pancakes. You and the little one must be hungry." She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in a long time. The handsome face she had once adored now seemed like a grotesque mask, hiding a monster underneath. The charming smile, the sparkling eyes, the easy confidence. It was all a performance, a carefully crafted illusion designed to deceive her. "I know Liam," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the morning stillness like a shard of glass. "I know everything." The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a flicker of panic, then a flash of anger. "What are you talking about?" he blustered, his voice losing its easy cadence. "Isabella Rossi." She said the name tasting like poison on her tongue. The loft in Soho. The bank account. The other baby. The color drained from his face. He stood there exposed and stripped of his lies, the towel around his waist, his only flimsy defense. For a long, silent moment, the only sound in the room was the frantic beating of Ellie's own heart. And then he did something she never would have expected. He didn't apologize. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He didn't even try to deny it. He simply shrugged, a gesture of such casual indifference that it was more shocking than any confession. "So you found out," he said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "I was wondering how long it would take you." The callousness of his words, the complete lack of remorse, was the final brutal blow. The man she had loved, the man she had built a life with, the man who was the father of her child, was a stranger. A cruel, heartless stranger who had not only betrayed her, but had done so with a chilling lack of regard for her, for their marriage, for their unborn baby. Without another word, she turned and walked out the door, closing it softly behind her. The sound echoed in the sudden deafening silence of the brownstone, a final definitive end to her fairy tale. She was homeless, heartbroken, and pregnant, and as she walked down the tree-lined streets of Park Slope, the tears that had been threatening to fall finally began to stream down her face, each one a testament to the life that had been stolen from her. The unraveling thread had led her to a truth more devastating than she could have ever imagined. And now she had to figure out how to weave a new life from the tattered remains of her old one. The world outside the brownstone felt alien, hostile. The familiar, comforting streets of her neighborhood were now a labyrinth of judgment, every passing stranger a potential witness to her humiliation. Ellie walked for hours, a ghost in her own life, her mind a maelstrom of shock, grief, and a white-hot rage that was starting to smolder beneath the surface. The baby, as if sensing her distress, was unnervingly still. Her first instinct was to call her mother, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. How could she articulate the sheer magnitude of Liam's betrayal? How could she explain that her perfect husband was a monster, her perfect life a sham? The shame was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She ended up at a small, anonymous coffee shop in a part of the city she rarely visited, the bitter taste of cheap coffee a fitting accompaniment to the bitterness in her soul. She sat there for hours, her phone a dead weight in her purse. Liam had called her a dozen times, his initial panic presumably turning into a desperate attempt at damage control. He had also sent a barrage of texts, each one more pathetic than the last. "Ellie, please come home. We need to talk. I can explain everything. It's not what you think. I'm sorry. I know I messed up. But I love you." The words "I love you" were so obscene, so utterly devoid of meaning, that she wanted to smash her phone against the wall. Love wasn't this. Love wasn't paying for another woman's luxury apartment while your pregnant wife faced eviction. Love wasn't a secret bank account, a secret life, a secret baby. As the day wore on, her shock began to morph into a cold, hard pragmatism. She was homeless. She was pregnant. And she had no money. Liam had controlled every aspect of their finances, and her own savings had been depleted long ago, absorbed into the black hole of their shared expenses. She had one option, a lifeline she was reluctant to grasp, but had no choice but to take. Her best friend, Chloe, a fiercely independent art gallery owner who had never been Liam's biggest fan. Chloe had always been wary of his smooth charm and effortless success, her artist's eye seeing through the glossy veneer to the emptiness beneath. Ellie had always defended him, blinded by love. Now Chloe's skepticism seemed like a prescient warning she had been too foolish to heed. She called Chloe, her voice cracking as she tried to explain the situation. Chloe didn't say, "I told you so." She just said, "Where are you?" "I'm coming to get you." An hour later, Ellie was ensconced in the spare bedroom of Chloe's stylish, art-filled apartment in Chelsea, a world away from the cloying domesticity of the brownstone. Chloe, with her sharp, asymmetrical haircut and no-nonsense demeanor, was a whirlwind of efficiency. She made tea, she ordered food. She listened without judgment as Ellie, in a halting, broken voice, recounted the events of the last 24 hours. "The bastard Chloe," said her voice a low, dangerous growl. "The absolute, unmitigated bastard." But even as Chloe's righteous anger provided a strange sort of comfort, the reality of her situation was beginning to set in. The eviction notice wasn't just a threat, it was a ticking clock. And Liam, she knew, would not make this easy. He was a man who cared about appearances above all else, and a messy public divorce would tarnish the perfect image he had so carefully cultivated. Her fears were confirmed the next day. A sleek black car, the kind that reeked of expensive lawyers, pulled up outside Chloe's building. A man in a tailored suit delivered a letter to Ellie. It was from Liam's lawyer. The letter was a masterpiece of legal intimidation, full of veiled threats and carefully worded accusations. It claimed that Ellie was emotionally unstable, that her erratic behavior was a danger to herself and her unborn child, and that Liam was deeply concerned for her well-being. It was a transparent attempt to paint her as the villain to seize control of the narrative before she had a chance to tell her side of the story. But the most chilling part of the letter was the final paragraph. It stated that Liam was filing for sole custody of the baby, citing her instability as the primary reason. The words swam before Ellie's eyes. He was going to take her baby. The child she had nurtured and protected for 7 months, the only good thing to come out of the wreckage of her marriage. The rage that had been smoldering inside her finally erupted a volcanic explosion of pure, unadulterated fury. "He's not getting my baby," she said, her voice low and trembling with an intensity that surprised even herself. "I will not let him." That night, she couldn't sleep. The hand-painted giraffes from the nursery seemed to haunt her, their gentle smiles now twisted into mocking leers. She thought of the vintage rocking chair, the hand-knitted blanket, the life she had so lovingly prepared for her child. And she thought of Isabella Rossi in her sun-drenched loft with her high-end obstetrician and her designer baby clothes, living the life that should have been hers. A new and dangerous idea began to form in her mind. She needed to see her. She needed to understand who this woman was. This woman who had so completely and utterly destroyed her life. It was a reckless, irrational impulse, born of desperation and a burning need for answers. But it was an impulse she couldn't ignore. The next day, she took the subway to Soho. The neighborhood, with its trendy boutiques and art galleries, felt like a different planet. She found the address from the lease agreement, a sleek, modern building with a doorman who looked at her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. She didn't try to go in. She just waited across the street in a small park, her pregnant belly a stark contrast to the effortless glamour of the people who streamed in and out of the building. She waited for hours, her resolve hardening with every passing minute. And then she saw her. Isabella Rossi was everything Ellie was not. She was tall and slender, with long raven hair and a model's cheekbones. She was dressed in a chic black maternity dress that managed to look both elegant and expensive. She moved with an easy, confident grace, a woman who was used to being looked at, to being admired. But as she got closer, Ellie saw something else. She saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the faint lines of worry around her mouth. She saw the way she clutched her own much smaller baby bump, a gesture that was both protective and strangely vulnerable. And then Ellie saw the man who was walking beside her, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist. It wasn't Liam. It was a man she recognized from the high society pages of the glossy magazines Liam used to leave lying around their apartment. He was Marco Moretti, a wealthy and notoriously ruthless real estate mogul. A man who was old enough to be Isabella's father. A man who was also, as Ellie knew from the same gossip columns, very, very married. The world, which had already been tilted on its axis, seemed to spin completely out of control. The story she had constructed in her mind, the simple sordid tale of a cheating husband and a home-wrecking mistress, was suddenly infinitely more complex, infinitely more dangerous. Liam wasn't just having an affair. He was entangled in something much bigger, something that involved one of the most powerful and dangerous men in the city. And Isabella Rossi, the woman she had come to hate with every fiber of her being, was not just his mistress. She was a pawn in a much larger game, a game whose rules Ellie was only just beginning to understand. As she watched Marco Moretti help a heavily pregnant Isabella into a waiting limousine, a new and terrifying thought occurred to her. Liam wasn't paying for the loft because he was in love with Isabella. He was paying for it because he was being forced to. He was being blackmailed. The realization did not bring her any comfort. It only deepened the mystery and the danger. Her descent into the dark underbelly of Liam's life was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun, and she was starting to realize that the eviction from her home might be the least of her problems. She had stumbled into a world of power money and secrets, a world where people like her were disposable. And she knew with a chilling certainty that she was not just fighting for her baby anymore. She was fighting for her life. The revelation that Isabella Rossi was not Liam's lover, but the mistress of the formidable Marco Moretti, sent Ellie reeling. She stumbled back to Chloe's apartment in a daze, the city's cacophony a dull roar in her ears. This wasn't a simple story of infidelity. It was a tangled web of power deceit, and she was beginning to suspect criminality. Liam, her once brilliant, ambitious husband, was not a predator. He was prey. This new understanding didn't absolve him. It didn't erase the eviction notice, the stolen money, or the chilling indifference in his eyes when she had confronted him. But it recontextualized his actions, painting them not as acts of malicious cruelty, but of desperate self-preservation. He was a man in a cage, and he had been chewing off his own leg to escape. Blackmail. Chloe breathed her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and fascination as Ellie laid out her discovery. It's the only thing that makes sense. Moretti is a shark. He's notorious. If he has something on Liam, he would squeeze him for every last penny. But what could a man like Marco Moretti, a titan of industry, with a net worth that dwarfed Liam's wildest ambitions, possibly want from a mid-level financial analyst? The rent on the Soho loft, while astronomical to Ellie, would be pocket change to him. It wasn't about the money. It was about control. It was about sending a message. Driven by a new, more urgent purpose, Ellie returned to the digital labyrinth of Liam's laptop. This time she wasn't looking for evidence of an affair. She was looking for the leverage Moretti held over him. She delved deeper into his work files, into encrypted folders and password-protected spreadsheets that she had previously ignored. She spent hours navigating complex financial jargon, her mind sharpened by adrenaline and a primal need to understand, slowly piecing together the puzzle. And then she found it. A hidden file buried deep within the server of Liam's firm, labeled simply M Project. It was a detailed record of a massive money laundering scheme, a complex network of offshore accounts and shell corporations designed to wash millions of dollars of illicit funds. And at the center of it all was Marco Moretti. The files showed that Liam, in his insatiable hunger for success, had become entangled with Moretti early in his career. He had been the architect of the scheme, the brilliant young analyst who had designed the system that made Moretti's dirty money clean. He had been handsomely rewarded, his rapid ascent in the financial world fueled by the very scheme that was now his prison. He had built their beautiful life, their gilded cage, on a foundation of criminality. The eviction, the drained bank accounts, the desperate scramble for cash. It all made a horrifying kind of sense. Moretti was bleeding him dry, not for the money itself, but to ensure his silence, to keep him tethered and compliant. The Soho loft was a symbol of his servitude, a constant, tangible reminder of who was in control, and Isabella Rossi, the pregnant mistress, was the human collateral. The knowledge was a double-edged sword. It explained everything, but it also plunged Ellie into a new level of terror. This was no longer a domestic drama. It was a federal crime. If this came to light, Liam would go to prison for a very long time. Their lives and the life of their unborn child would be irrevocably destroyed. She was trapped. If she exposed Liam, she would be condemning the father of her child to a life behind bars. If she did nothing, she would be at the mercy of a ruthless criminal and a husband who had already proven he would sacrifice her to save himself. As she sat there, the damning evidence glowing on the laptop screen, a sudden sharp pain shot through her abdomen. She gasped, her hand flying to her belly. It was a Braxton Hicks contraction, a false alarm, but it was a visceral reminder of the real innocent life at the center of this sordid mess. Her baby, her son. In that moment, something inside her shifted. The fear, the anger, the sense of betrayal. They were all still there, but they were now overshadowed by a fierce, primal instinct to protect her child. She would not let him be born into this chaos. She would not let his life be defined by the sins of his father. She closed the laptop. She knew what she had to do. The next day, she called Liam. Not with the tearful pleas of a wronged wife, but with the cold, calculated precision of a woman who had just stared into the abyss and had not blinked. "We need to meet," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "My terms. Neutral ground." They met at a quiet, anonymous diner in Midtown, a place devoid of memories, a sterile environment for the surgery that was about to take place. Liam looked terrible. He was pale and gaunt, his expensive suit hanging off his frame. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a hunted, haunted look. He started to speak, the familiar, pathetic apologies tumbling from his lips. Ellie held up a hand, cutting him off. "I don't want to hear it, Liam," she said, her voice like ice. "I'm not here for your excuses. I'm here for a deal." She slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a post-nuptial agreement. Drafted by a lawyer, Chloe had found a bulldog of a woman who specialized in contentious divorces. The terms were simple and non-negotiable. Liam would sign over the brownstone to her, free and clear. He would set up a trust fund for the baby, a significant sum that would ensure his future regardless of what happened to Liam. And he would agree to her having sole, undisputed custody of their child. He would have visitation rights, but they would be at her discretion. In return, she would not go to the police. She would not expose the M Project. She would give him the one thing he so desperately craved a chance to disappear, to extricate himself from the web he had woven. He stared at the paper, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You know," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I know everything," she replied, her gaze unwavering. I know about Moretti. I know about the money laundering. I know that your entire life is a house of cards, and I am the one person who can pull the pin." He looked at her, then really looked at her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of the man she had once loved. She saw not the monster, not the jailer, but a terrified, broken man who had made a deal with the devil and had been paying the price ever since. Why, he asked, his voice cracking, "Why are you doing this?" "For him," she said, her hand instinctively going to her belly. "He deserves a father, even a flawed one, and he deserves a life free from this filth. I am giving you a chance to give him that. It's more than you deserve." Tears welled in his eyes, tears of gratitude, of shame, of a profound and devastating loss. He took the pen she offered his hand, trembling, and signed the document. As Ellie walked out of the diner and back into the harsh light of the city, she did not feel a sense of triumph. She felt only a profound and aching sadness. She had won. She had secured her home, her baby's future, her freedom. But the victory felt hollow. She had saved her family by destroying it. She had thought that discovering the truth would be the end of her ordeal, but she was starting to realize that the truth was just the beginning. The house of cards had fallen, but the pieces were still scattered around her. And now she had to somehow find the strength to build a new life from the ruins, a life for herself and for the son who would soon be in her arms, the son who would never know the full terrible story of how he came into the world. And for that, at least, she was grateful. The weeks that followed the confrontation in the sterile diner were a maelstrom of legal proceedings, logistical hurdles, and a profound, echoing loneliness that settled deep within Ellie's bones. The execution of the post-nuptial agreement happened with a swiftness that underscored Liam's desperate desire to sever ties and disappear before the full weight of Marco Moretti's crumbling empire came crashing down on him. Lawyers, stern-faced and efficient, exchanged documents. Ellie signed papers that felt heavier than their flimsy weight, suggested each signature a definitive stroke, erasing a chapter of her life. The deed to the Park Slope brownstone was officially transferred into her name, a fortress reclaimed. Simultaneously, a substantial trust fund for the baby, carefully structured by Chloe's recommended bulldog of a lawyer, to be impenetrable to any future claims or legal fallout from Liam's illicit activities, was established. Liam, true to his word, vanished as if he were a phantom, a figment of a past life. His phone number became a dead end. His once active social media profiles were scrubbed from the internet, and his physical presence in the bustling heart of New York City seemed to evaporate like morning mist under a harsh sun. Ellie didn't inquire about his destination, and a surprising numbness accompanied this lack of curiosity. The man who had been the center of her universe was now a ghost she no longer wished to chase. There was a quiet finality to it, no tearful goodbyes, no dramatic last words, just the stark, cold reality of a life irrevocably altered. Moving back into the brownstone was an experience steeped in surrealism. The house which had once been the glittering symbol of her idyllic marriage, and then the painful emblem of her stolen life, now felt like a hard-won, reclaimed territory. Yet it was undeniably haunted. The faint, expensive scent of Liam's sandalwood cologne stubbornly clung to the air in the master closet. A half-read biography of some tech mogul lay on his bedside table, a bookmark peeking out as if he might return at any moment to resume his reading. The silence in the large, high-ceilinged rooms was a palpable entity, a constant, suffocating reminder of his absence and the life they had shared, or rather the life she thought they had shared. Chloe, her steadfast, fiercely loyal friend, became Ellie's anchor and guardian angel during this disorienting period. "This isn't just a house, Ellie," Chloe had said, her voice firm but kind, as they stood in the grand living room, dust motes dancing in the weak afternoon light. "It's your castle, and right now it needs a new queen to banish the old king's ghosts." Together they embarked on a mission to purge the house of Liam's lingering presence. They sorted through his impeccably tailored suits, his collection of designer shoes, his pretentious first editions, packing them all into anonymous cardboard boxes destined for a charity he would have undoubtedly considered beneath his station. Chloe didn't just offer muscle. She offered a running commentary, a much-needed dose of dark humor that chipped away at the oppressive sadness. They rearranged furniture, Chloe insisting on new feng shui to clear out the bad juju. Ellie found herself sketching ideas for new paint colors, brighter shades, to replace the somber, masculine tones Liam had preferred. Slowly, painstakingly, the house began to shift, transforming from a mausoleum of a shared past into the cradle of a singular, uncertain but determined future. The nursery, however, remained an untouched sanctuary. The hand-painted giraffes and hot air balloons still drifted serenely across the pale yellow walls. The vintage rocking chair, her grandmother's legacy, stood sentinel in the corner, the hand-knitted blanket still draped expectantly over its arm. This room was hers, and the baby's untainted by Liam's deceit. Here Ellie would spend hours, her hands resting protectively on her growing belly, the weight a comforting reassurance. She would narrate her days to her unborn son. Not the sugar-coated fairy tales of a handsome prince and a life of effortless ease, but new stories, stories of a resilient queen, a warrior mother who was painstakingly building a fortress for him, brick by hard-won brick, a castle of love and unwavering strength. But even as she began to reclaim her physical space and her emotional equilibrium, the insidious tentacles of Liam's betrayal continued to snake their way into her life. The eviction notice, though neutralized by the post-nuptial agreement, served as a chilling framed reminder on her desk of just how precariously close she had come to losing everything. The trust fund was a significant relief, ensuring her son's long-term future. But her own immediate financial situation was far more precarious than she had initially realized. She had no job, no independent income stream, and the brownstone, her reclaimed castle, came with a king's ransom in exorbitant running costs: property taxes, utilities, insurance, and general upkeep. One dreary, rain-lashed afternoon, as Ellie sat at the antique mahogany desk in Liam's former study, now her study, sorting through a veritable mountain of mail that had accumulated during her self-imposed exile at Chloe's apartment, she found a thick, official-looking envelope from their bank. Her heart, a organ she was beginning to think had taken far too much abuse, gave a familiar lurch. With trembling fingers, she tore it open. It was a foreclosure notice. The mortgage on the brownstone, an enormous sum, she had naively assumed Liam, the financial wizard, was diligently paying, was like their erstwhile rent months in arrears. The truth crashed down on her with sickening force. Liam, in his frantic, desperate attempts to funnel money to appease Moretti and maintain his double life, had systematically bled every single one of their joint accounts dry, including the one meant for mortgage payments. The house was legally hers, a grand gesture in the divorce settlement, but it was teetering on the brink of being repossessed by the bank. The Ellie of a few months prior would have crumpled, dissolved into a torrent of helpless tears and overwhelming despair. But this new Ellie, the woman forged in the crucible of betrayal, the woman who had stared down a duplicitous husband and indirectly a ruthless criminal, did not break. She felt a tremor of the old panic, a cold wave of fear. But she pushed it down. She took a steadying, deep breath, the kind her prenatal yoga instructor advocated, made herself a strong cup of chamomile tea, and then with a newfound steely resolve, opened her laptop. She possessed a secret weapon, a dormant talent she had willingly, lovingly set aside years ago. Before Liam, before the whirlwind romance and the gilded cage of their marriage, she had been a Eleanor Vance, a brilliant and sought-after illustrator. Her whimsical, intricately detailed designs, full of hidden wonders and gentle humor, had graced the pages of critically acclaimed children's books and boutique stationery. Publishers and design firms had been clamoring for her unique style. She had joyfully relinquished her burgeoning career for Liam, swept away by his dazzling promises of a future where her artistic endeavors could be a hobby, not a necessity, a life where he would provide everything. Now, ironically, her art, the very thing she had sacrificed for him, was her only discernible path to salvation, the only tool she had to save her castle and secure her independence. The subsequent weeks were a blur of intense, almost feverish creative activity. She converted a small, sunlit guest room into a makeshift studio, its walls soon covered in sketches and color palettes. Her grief, her residual anger, her fear. But most powerfully, her fierce lioness-like love for her unborn son poured out onto the Bristol board. She created entire worlds, populated by brave, adventurous little animals who navigated enchanted forests fraught with gentle perils of resilient young heroes and heroines who, much like herself, discovered their innate strength when faced with daunting adversity. There was Pip, the timid field mouse, who learned to roar, and Luna, the little lost star, who found her way home by sharing her light. Each character, each narrative, was a reflection of her own painful yet empowering journey. She meticulously curated a portfolio, a vibrant collection of her most compelling new work, intertwined with some of her previously published successes. With a prayer and a pounding heart, she dispatched it to every publisher, every literary agent, every industry contact she could unearth from her old address book and Chloe's extensive network. The rejections arrived first, as they often do. A steady, disheartening stream of polite but firm no's, or, worse, deafening silence. Each one felt like a small sting, a whisper of doubt trying to erode her resolve. But Ellie, now fueled by a primal desperation that was far more potent than any fear of failure, persisted. Chloe was her rock, scoffing at the rejections. "Their loss, Elle. They don't know genius when it lands on their doorstep." And then one crisp Tuesday morning, as she was sketching a scene of a small bear cub bravely crossing a rushing river, her phone rang. An unfamiliar number. She almost ignored it. "Hello," she answered, her voice hesitant. The voice on the other end was warm, intelligent, and enthusiastic. It was a senior editor from a small, highly respected independent publisher in Vermont, a woman named Agnes Periwinkle, who had apparently been utterly captivated by the raw emotion, the whimsical beauty, and the fierce, unyielding originality of her submitted work. Agnes didn't just want to publish one of her books. She wanted to discuss a whole series based on the resilient animal characters Ellie had created. The advance they offered was not a king's ransom, not enough to instantly vanquish all her financial woes or secure the brownstone indefinitely. But it was a significant start. More importantly, it was a lifeline, a tangible symbol of her own talent, her own ability to provide to survive, and ultimately, to thrive. It was a resounding declaration of her independence, earned through her own merit. It was the first cornerstone of her new life, laid by her own hands. A month later, just as the first tenacious green shoots of spring were beginning to push defiantly through the cold, hard ground of the city's parks, mirroring the fragile new beginnings in her own life, Ellie went into labor. After 12 intense hours, she gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby boy, who arrived with a surprisingly full shock of dark hair and his mother's fiercely determined, observant eyes. She named him Noah, a name that signified to rest, to find comfort, to be at peace, because that, in essence, was what he had brought her amidst the devastating storm of her life, a profound sense of peace, an unshakable sense of purpose, an undeniable reason to rebuild her shattered world from its very foundations. As she lay in the quiet, sterile semi-darkness of the hospital room, Noah sleeping soundly in the crook of her arm, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady, comforting rhythm, her thoughts drifted to Liam. She wondered with a detached sort of curiosity where he was, what new persona he might be constructing in some distant, unsuspecting city. Did he ever think of the son he would likely never know, the son whose future he had so carelessly jeopardized? A part of her, a small, tender part, still mourned the charming, ambitious man she thought she had loved, the dream of the life she had believed they were building together. But it was a faint, distant ache now, like the phantom pain of a long-healed wound, a scar that served as a reminder rather than an active source of hurt. She also found her thoughts turning to Isabella Rossi. Just a few weeks prior, Chloe had pointed out a small article buried deep within the financial pages of a national newspaper. Marco Moretti had been dramatically arrested, his vast, seemingly untouchable criminal empire finally crumbling under the relentless weight of a federal investigation. There was no explicit mention of a money laundering scheme architected by a young financial analyst, no mention of Liam's name. But there was a brief, almost throwaway line about Moretti's beautiful pregnant mistress, Isabella Rossi. It stated she had given birth to a daughter and had subsequently vanished from public view, rumored to have been granted a new identity and a secure new life in an undisclosed location in exchange for her crucial testimony against the mogul. Ellie felt an unexpected and strange sense of kinship with this woman she had never met. This woman who had once been the object of her intense hatred and jealousy, but who was in reality both her unwitting rival and her fellow victim. They were, she mused, two sides of the same tarnished coin, two women whose lives had been irrevocably shaped and damaged by the choices and manipulations of powerful, profoundly selfish men. She found herself hoping with a sincerity that welled up from a surprisingly compassionate part of her soul that Isabella and her infant daughter had indeed found their own safe harbor, their own peaceful castle, far from the wreckage of Moretti's reign. Looking down at her own son, his tiny, perfectly formed hand wrapped trustingly around her little finger, Ellie knew that her journey, her odyssey of rebuilding, was far from over. There would undoubtedly be more struggles, more unforeseen setbacks. There would be moments of suffocating doubt and bone-chilling fear. The mortgage on the brownstone still loomed a dragon to be slain, and raising a child alone while launching a career was a Herculean task. But she also knew with a certainty that resonated deep within her marrow that she would not just be okay. She would prevail. She was no longer the helpless damsel in distress, passively waiting in a tower for a prince to come and rescue her. That delusion had been burned away in the fire of her ordeal. She was the queen, the architect and ruler of her own burgeoning kingdom, the undisputed master of her own destiny. And in the quiet, sun-dappled sanctuary of her reclaimed brownstone, her precious son nestled securely in her arms, a future she was actively, courageously crafting. With her own 2 hands stretching out before her, Ellie felt a profound sense of liberation. She was finally, unequivocally, truly free. The saccharine, illusory fairy tale was definitively over its glossy pages turned to ash, but her real life, a life defined by hard-won strength, unyielding resilience, and the boundless, unconditional love for her child, had at long last truly begun. Her son Noah would grow up as surrounded by love art and the truth of his mother's strength. He would never know the full, terrible, sordid story of the chaos that preceded his arrival, the darkness from which his mother had wrested their peace. And for that, at least, Ellie was profoundly, deeply grateful. The story of Ellie is a harrowing journey through the depths of betrayal, but it is also a powerful testament to the indomitable strength of a woman and a mother. She was stripped of everything she thought she knew: her home, her security, her love. But in the ashes of her old life, she discovered a power she never knew she possessed. Her story is a reminder that even in our darkest moments, when we feel most alone and abandoned, we have within us the capacity to not only survive, but to rebuild, to reclaim our narrative, and to emerge stronger than before. If Ellie's fight for her and her son's future moved you, please give this video a like to show your support. Share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories of resilience, survival, and the incredible power of the human spirit. Thank you for listening.